It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. We're back again. Welcome back, podcasters. Let's all say hello and introduce ourselves. Starting with Claire.
Hi, Claire Patera.
Chad.
Oh, Chad, your turn. Tag,
I'm so sorry. I'm used to somebody else going before me. Hi, I'm Chad Jetner.
Hi, I'm Peter Lawrence.
And I'm Kyle Bacher. And today we're going to talk about how do you know when you need help? How do you know when you need more people on a project? It was always hard for me to figure out, like, if I was overwhelmed or not, if I should bring another person.
Yeah, I'm really curious to get some advice from all of you because this is definitely not my strong suit.
Yeah. So I haven't worked on a lot of big projects, but I know there was one time where I should have gotten help, but instead I spent a week beating my head against a wall,
Just
trying to be a developer and have a skill set that I just didn't have. And that was a bad idea. That was a rookie mistake.
That is a rookie mistake.
I didn't know JavaScript. So.
And you weren't going to teach it to yourself in, an hour.
No. So then I got help. What took me a week to not accomplish took someone else 2 hours to accomplish. So.
Was that somebody, Peter? Was Peter the one that helped you?
I think it was Mel.
Feels like a Peter thing to do.
I don't think I did it in this particular case. I think I have helped Kyle in the past in 2-hour increments, but I think this was after his week-long journey of non-learning.
There was some spreadsheet help you gave me one time.
Yep.
And I don't remember all the times. There's just so many.
I'm a helper.
He was so helpful that I actually just played video games.
Nice.
No, I'm kidding.
Kyle, did you get new glasses?
These are my monitor glasses. I have like 100 pair of glasses because I'm losing them. I put stuff in my pockets and it becomes like a rock grinder, like for making agates, and destroys everything in there. And yeah, I should probably go to the eye doctor. So on a big project where you have multiple people, like, how do you know you need to add people?
Let me ask this question. Let me ask it a different way. On every big project, do you always want to add people, especially at the beginning?
No. I mean, I think it goes in phases, right? Like, you got to understand, one, what you're building, how you're going to build it, like put the solution together, put the architecture together, put all that stuff together, and actually get to a point where you can do, some minimal feature, right? And drive towards that. And you want to get your patterns in place, your frameworks in place, and all of that stuff. And that's not something that you start, that's not something that you just ramp up a 10-person team to do immediately, because you're going to have 2 busy people and 8 folks that are just like waiting for the busy people to be done with the thing they're doing. Right.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it's like a curve, right? You start
once that framework and scaffolding and structure is all in place, would you take as many people as you could? Obviously, there's limits to everything, right? Like, you can't put 1,000 developers on a project on day 200 and say go and expect anything other than complete chaos and destruction. But
yeah, I think it's once you have built up like whatever Scrum, Agile, whatever methodology you're using to manage the project itself. Once you build up either your backlog or plan out your sprints or get enough stories, actionable stories, well-defined
you know what
stories,
you're building.
Yeah. Then you can kind of ramp up a little, like kind of a lot, right? And you just don't want to get too far ahead of your skis where you're in a situation where like you have a tech lead and they're not able to look at, or they're not able to do proper code reviews. They're not able to do proper oversight of everything. And then just like things start moving at such a rapid pace where you're building on top of maybe bad patterns or bad ideas, or, refactoring opportunities get harder and harder because you didn't catch, So yeah, you can ramp up pretty quick, but you've got to find the sweet spot for whatever, as far as developers go, number of developers per tech lead or per, whatever that role is defined as for your group. There's a number there. And I think it's, it's in the single digits. It's not a double-digit number.
It's kind of a feeling too, right? Like as a tech lead, you'll feel like, oh, I've got too many people, or, oh, I don't have enough people for the amount of work that I'm creating.
Yeah, and then it hits this point of diminishing returns pretty soon too, right? Like where it's, what you you might not really know when you don't have enough people, but you absolutely know when you have too many people.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It's mostly a feeling, and it's 100% dependent on the people. But it is. I mean, it becomes pretty evident, right? Like if work is being put off or not picked up because you weren't able to help folks out with understanding something or with providing direction or anything else, then yes, you have too many people, right?
When you're the bottleneck.
Yeah.
When the tech lead is the bottleneck, you've got too many people.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So you might, if you do need more people, more horsepower, you're not going to add one person. You might be adding a person or a developer and a tech lead.
I mean, if you can split the work up that way, yeah. Like a lot of projects, you'll be able to split it up into like a couple of different work streams, right? Like we're building something massive, and here's an integrations work stream, and here's a data science work stream, and here's just kind of a traditional app dev work stream. And each of those streams could have, a tech lead assigned to them. It could have a handful of developers on each. And you can even like mix and match developers from one stream to the next, and it's probably not a big deal, but it does get really, really tricky. I mean, too many streams, and just like Ghostbusters,
Yeah.
Chad, is there an optimal number of developers per, like the ratio of developers to tech lead? Is there like a, like you talk about it in school and classrooms? I mean, does that carry over to like a big project?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does it vary
I don't
by
have
project?
a great answer. Yeah. I don't have a great answer. I think it's dependent on the project and dependent on what you're building. Like if you're building just like commodity IT services, that ratio is probably pretty high. You can probably have a lot of developers to the tech lead, right? Like if you're just building a web app with patterns that everybody knows.
Right.
Go build a landing page, go build a this, go build a that. Everybody sort of knows what they're doing. And
here's a bunch of CRUD operations type screens.
Right.
We don't need, that stuff it's different, as opposed to like, here's this absolutely strange data science problem that, you're going to have, it's going to take a while to dig into. And the patterns are going to be way different than anything people, I mean, that's going to be something completely different. So, yeah. I don't know if I answered your question.
It varies. Yeah, it varies.
Okay.
It kind of varies.
And it varies by the
teams. Yeah, it varies is always such a cop-out answer though, and I hate doing it all the time. But like, I think the key is though, like if you truly, if you're building a commodity thing, right? And we used to do like a lot of LifeRay portal stuff, or any kind of portal thing, or any kind of web page or web app, or even like mobile. Like a lot of those things are not. I don't want to say they're not difficult in their own way, but like the patterns are fairly well established there, right? You don't need to research the best way to, I don't know, save, do JPA queries or, ORM stuff, right? Like all of that stuff has been done to death for the last couple of decades, and we don't need a ton of direction, right? Like all of your developers and your tech lead can all be developing, and, you can be pretty efficient pretty quickly. But if you break out of that and you're starting to, you do, a lot of like, I don't know, industry specific things, it gets trickier and trickier.
Well, and I get why you don't like the answer. It varies, right? It's not a cop out though. I mean, could you imagine how boring life would be if everything was not variable and
We do
it
it
was
all.
easy to do this stuff. Like you didn't need
We have all the
people who
data.
could
We know
think
it all now.
creatively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I've experienced is like, when there's a skill gap that needs to be filled by someone on a team. That's pretty obvious. Okay, we need a person that can do X. And like Chad was saying, when you have too many people, but somebody's sitting around while someone else does what they were kind of assigned to do. I've had BAs drop off of projects because with SharePoint being, you're not developing, you're configuring, and you're limited. So to be in the room was critical because people would ask for things, and would it work if we did it a little bit differently than what you're asking for? To be able to do that right there when it comes up is, I think, more effective than having a BA come back and say, hey, they want to do all this stuff. And you're like, oh man, well, we can do it. It's just not going to be exactly what they're asking for. So then I'm playing the role of the BA anyway. So I've had that situation. Or it's just like you get in a cadence, you get up and running, and like maybe we don't need as much PM time. Back in the days we had project managers, on my one-person projects and stuff to kind of coordinate between me and the customer. But we get in a cadence, and then it was like, well, I think we're good. And I think it's valuable to be able to cut people loose if you really don't need them. But it's also, if you need the people, you need to add them, then you need to add them. But knowing that as a consultant for me was always a struggle.
No, I get that. So what are good reasons to add people to a project? Are there good reasons? What are the best reasons?
I can tell you the bad reasons.
Okay, let's go there. That was my next question. So
I'm way better at addressing negatives than I am positives.
I think there's a lot more examples of negatives happening in life that you learned from, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just the idea that adding more developers is going to get something faster, right? Like, it doesn't. I mean, maybe, right? In some cases, more developers is absolutely going to be more helpful. But if you're pushing it up against the deadline and you're going to be a month late, 2 months late, right? And you've been on a project for a year or 2 years, adding a developer to help you get something done, 4 weeks sooner after being on a project for 2 years is not going to work out, right? Because you got to have 2 years of domain expertise. There's all this other knowledge that goes into it where, I mean, just getting somebody on board is usually a few-day process if they're really, really good.
Right.
It's usually, it's rare to see a developer come onto a team, come onto a project, and actually be able to commit code within that same week, right? So don't try to just adding people to make a deadline happen sooner or to make something deliver a little bit quicker. No, it's possible that other projects, right? Like if I'm on something for a couple of years and I'm like, man, this is way larger than anything I could have imagined.
Right.
Then I'll probably ask for one, like find opportunities to split it into, like I said earlier, split it into different streams, and kind of have those work independently, and then size those streams according to whatever that domain is. That's doable, but that's not like a get me this tomorrow kind of thing. That's a well planned,
Well, and I don't know if any of you guys have read it, but there's a book, and I've never read it, but the Mythical Man Month, and I'm pretty sure the SDG Book Club read it at one point. But that book addresses exactly what you're talking about, Chad, right? Like you don't just throw people at a project because it's running behind, because the ramp up time isn't worth the extra bodies. Honestly, it just doesn't help.
I've seen that firsthand. We're going to add 3 consultants because we need to get this done in 2 weeks. And it's like, well, that's not going to really, like, the ramp up time, and somebody like giving them the work to do, delegating that stuff. It just didn't work out very well.
Never has that ever worked out well.
What also doesn't work, though, is saying, well, we have 2 weeks left. We have this many people. So we're going to need them to work 70 hours a week in order to meet this deadline. And I've seen that happen, too. And that's the definition of it looks good on paper. Like we've done the calculations. So
I think and just think about it practically, too, right? Like the way we build applications. We have a front end, we have a back end, we've got a database, we've got integrations, we've got infrastructure, and all of these things can kind of happen on their own. But if I'm writing React code, I probably want to hit an API. And if I got to wait for somebody else to write that, then I'm going to mock out a lot of objects in React. And then I'm going to have to go back and unmock those and hit an actual API if I'm waiting for that thing to be deployed. But I can't really have 2 people working on one endpoint, right? Because that gets a little tricky to manage. So like you just start pushing your, like kicking the can down the road. If you add a ton of people, I mean, you're creating a lot of busy work just to say, yes, I've added people to a project and it might get there a little sooner. It likely won't though. So
is there a point where like you're waiting to reach complete capacity and then, well, now we absolutely have to add another person? Are you waiting that long? Because then you're like, it's more time has passed on the project, more things have happened. Maybe there's more ramp up now. Do you wait to like hit that breaking point, or do you try to see that coming?
I think you try to see it coming, right, Peter? I mean, you don't.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of an intuition thing too. I mean, after you've done this for maybe multiple decades, you can kind of tell that, this is, I might have thought this was one thing when I started, but it is something it's a completely different animal now that I'm in it. And so intuitively, I think you get to a point where you're just able to kind of feel, and that's a horrible piece of advice for listeners. I would advise you to get 25 years of experience in the industry.
Get 25 years, and that's the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, you'll just know. But I think even after doing a few projects, you'll find you'll find that you're starting to see patterns evolve. Not software patterns, but like program level patterns, right? Like, oh, this was the state of my discovery materials when I got the project. And then as I got into it, I realized that this is completely different than what I understood it to be. Right. So you'll come to understand that. Yeah.
You do get to a point in either project where after 2 weeks in our meeting, I'm like, I'm going to need 2 more weeks. I know what I'm doing. It's a migration. I've been here before. And it's going to take longer than this. And that was fine, and recognizing it early on was helpful.
Well, it's a lot easier than telling them that on your last day, right?
Yeah.
Oh, not done. Ooh.
Yeah, that's scope creep. And maybe that's the cause of having to add more people is things like scope creep. Does that happen to you, Chad or Peter?
A little bit. I mean, you get pretty good at identifying a minimally viable product, right? And I think that word means a few different things to a few different people, but like you really drive towards this one thing. And if the word minimally gets taken out of that, then you got 2 problems now, right? It's the scope creep isn't really. I don't know, Peter. You go. I'm kind of struggling because I'm struggling because I'm dealing with a lot of this in my day to day. So
well, and it happens because you had an agreement with the team. Like this is what the MVP, the minimal product is, and everybody around the table said, yes, that is the minimum product. And then you go for a while, and all of a sudden somebody says, "Hey, everybody, what about X?" Oh, yeah, X. We totally need X. We should really do X. X is totally part of the minimum. I don't know why we didn't see that before. It's so obvious.
I've actually been, the analogy that I've been using lately is, say your project is, hey, we're going to cure cancer, right?
Yep, right.
Well, your
Piece of
minimally viable product is a cure for cancer, right? Which is
right.
an easy thing to say. Hey, is cancer cured or not? And if your project is one that's like, hey, we're going to cure cancer and diabetes, well, you can't just add things on, you know. But if your minimally viable product doesn't actually cure cancer, if it's just like a nasal spray, what are you doing, right? Like, you build different parts of the solution, and yeah, maybe it is a spray that you use to inject drugs into your snout, and that's somehow what cures cancer. But goodness
So the
gracious.
first step
God,
to
we
a
could
cure
only
for
hope,
cancer
right?
is
That would be
Primatene
great.
Mist is the first step to curing cancer.
Yeah, it's a little yak shaving, but like, you do break it down into that kind of into like distinct little problems, right? And we're software people, so I'm using this as a really extreme example of how some of our projects could go, but your end result is a cure. Getting there, yes, there's a delivery mechanism, and there's a lot of science, but you can't put science on a timeline and just say, oh, well, we thought we'd have,
We will discover the cure in 8 weeks.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to think that the problems you guys have to solve are a little bit easier than trying to cure cancer, but
Thankfully, yes.
that's a good
Yeah.
analogy.
Yeah.
So let's come down away from the teams a little bit and maybe talk about some individuals.
Do we have to?
Well, we could talk about an individual. Thanks for
Not
being
me,
with us
please.
today, Claire.
Not me, please.
So, in your day-to-day, like, how much time should you spend trying to figure things out before you ask for help? So I try to, it's like, spend 15 minutes and then call me. If you can't get, at least Google something, at least, but don't, don't spend 2 hours on something that I can do in 5 minutes. That's just not a good use of your time. So, but it's hard to like get people to ask for help that way, because people want to figure their own stuff out, learn how to do it. So how do you, I guess, how do you regulate that yourself with what you're doing to make sure you're making the best use of your time?
The first thing you do, like you said, is try, right? Try to solve the problem. Try to solve or to complete the task, whatever that task is. And in so doing, hopefully you'll determine how big that task really is. Like, oh, this was a 5-minute task and I'm done. Ta-da. Or, oh, this is now that I've scraped away the little silver thing and revealed the pin number underneath, I realize that this is a 5-day task.
Right. Or I Googled it and I found 3 different ways to tackle it and I don't know which is the best, right?
Right. And I could spend the next 5 days figuring out which is the best. And depending on, like, is it a 5-day is implementing the solution 5 days? Well, don't spend 5 days picking between the best, pick one and go. But if it's a, 6-month project and you need to spend the 5 days to research it, doesn't have to be you, but at least now you know enough to delegate. And I think delegation is probably the hardest skill to learn.
Why is that?
Well, here's why it's hard for me is, like, we talked earlier about, like, commodity coding, right? Like, it's writing code that we all know how to write over and over again, and You can be very effective if you're super, super focused. And as a developer, like if you can not have to context switch constantly, you're going to be a lot better than if you're constantly getting diverted. So one of the problems I have with delegation is knowing that, right? Like if I have like a little 5-minute issue that I could probably ask somebody a question for and get an answer, or I could get help with, well, that guy's gonna have to switch context. He's gonna have to get to me, and then he's gonna have to get back to his thing. So one of the things that I do and my buddy on my project does is we try to take all the weird stuff ourselves, like all of the weird, like little researchy things, infrastructure oddities, integration oddities, investigation type stuff, so that developers can develop, right? Like people that can write code without having to be distracted by questions when we know that we're going to scope out something that's going to generate a lot of questions. Like we can just do that. And so for me, it's not really necessarily hard for me to delegate that stuff. I just don't want to, because I'm okay with my focus constantly being shifted all over the place. Mm-hmm. I just think it's super helpful for other folks when theirs isn't.
Yeah, so you've assigned yourself the role of troubleshooter, essentially.
Yeah.
And you're not delegating so as not to distract and have the customer have to go tell someone you need to add people to your project because you were distracting people with other questions.
Yeah. It's more of for me, not delegating is more of trying to keep things as efficient as possible. It's not that I'm just hoarding issues myself or trying to, or I'm unable to delegate really. It's just that I know that focus matters, and when you delegate things, you are intentionally kind of breaking focus a little bit downstream or upstream or somewhere. So I don't know, Peter, what you were going to say something too, right?
So I was going to say, delegating is also sort of the adding someone new, but on a much smaller scale, right? I'm going to add someone to this team of one to do this task, and now I have to bring them up to speed on all the information that I have in my head that I've gathered over however long I've been doing whatever we're talking about, right? Like if it's a project, from the beginning of the project, I know everything about the project because I've been here all the time. And now I have to share the important things and not share the not important things to try to get that done. And sometimes it feels like, well, that's going to be more intensive and take almost as much time as it is to get that task done.
I think with delegation, it's avoiding pain. There's a short-term cost, the pain of, the ramp up and the handoff.
Right. There's
going to be a long-term benefit, but you have to get past that short-term pain to get there. And a lot of times it's just like, well, I'd rather actually spend another 2 days of my time beating my head against the wall than spending an hour trying to explain everything and then answer questions and involve another person. I have a hard time like adding people or include, like, I just want to do it all myself. But you can't. Like you have human limitations, and it's like, but I think that also delegating to the right person, adding the right person is critical. I worked on a project where we tested, everything was fine. Then we launched, and instead of 5 people using it, it was 150, and the performance hit changed how things worked, and all of a sudden stuff wasn't loading and problems were happening, and then it was okay, like now we have to troubleshoot the code. Who do we have? Who can help me? Ramped up 2 people and spent hours, and then I found an expert that fixed it in 5 minutes by moving semicolon down 6 lines. And it was like, yeah, that was a lesson. You know, it's like you have to have the right help.
So Kyle, I know that you fixed a problem, a long-term problem with a checkbox recently too.
I did.
Yeah.
That was a mistake.
No. No,
He delegated that, Peter. It wasn't him.
It wasn't him?
I'm kidding. Okay. I don't know. I don't even know what you're talking about. So
I don't want to give too much away, but you know, just finding the checkbox made all the difference, right? But it was a long time to get there.
I think I might know what you're talking about now.
Yeah. Claire was involved.
I was involved, yes.
There you go. So
yeah.
But
that was a problem I delegated.
See, there you go.
To the right person.
To the right person.
Look at that.
But again, you know, if you don't delegate that problem may not go away because you may not know about or find the checkbox for a really long time.
Right.
And I think experience helps with that. I think another problem with delegation is that it's kind of like sharing the spotlight or sharing having two people in the gold medal podium, right? Like, yeah, it's a challenge, and especially, you know, highly motivated consultants like we are, we like being the people that solve problems. I mean, I love putting on a fireman hat and putting out fires.
Who doesn't want to be a hero?
Right.
You know, like I'm a micro hero several times a week, and it feels good. I love recognition, and I like to save the day and help people out. But then you're right, like that, whether it's conscious or not, that sharing of the spotlight. I think it's if you see it as a defeat that you had to get help.
That's my problem. That's one of my problems. Yeah. Is I feel like if I have to ask for help, it means that I failed in some way, shape, or form, and that's not the case at all. Obviously,
you failed to do time travel, I think, is the real problem there, right?
Or failed to learn something. I mean, I love to learn new things too, and I love problem solving. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I kind of like digging in and trying to figure things out, but at the same time, to Kyle's point, right, you can't do all of it all the time. So you have to trust other people and trust that even if they're not an expert, that they're going to put the time in to try to solve the problem. And it doesn't have to be the same way you would do it.
No, in software development, that's the beauty of it, is there's a million different ways to do it right.
Yeah.
Even if Chad's is the only one he thinks is right.
Chad's way is the right way, right?
There's the Chad patterns and there's the anti patterns. I don't know.
I just have certain predilections. And
who doesn't?
Yeah.
And when I walked in 12 years ago, it was intimidating because so many knowledgeable, experienced people on top of their game, you know, and I felt like I snuck in, and
you
I know how you feel, Kyle.
Yeah,
I've been consistently intimidated for almost 13 years. I understand.
Yeah, and that's
in
tough,
a good way.
Because then you really don't want to ask for help because then they might be onto you.
I do feel like, you know, being at SDG is sort of like being on an NFL football team. And when you start at SDG, you're sort of coming out of the college ranks. You're like, oh, well, I know how to play football and I know all of the things.
You think you did.
But then you get to, you know, that next level and you're like, oh, this is playing football. You know, just for add some mixed sports metaphors in there for us.
No, that's another good analogy.
But I do think, like, you know, in the consulting game, you are really, really working with smart people, all the smart people. And as one of our consultants loves to say, that they like being the not the smartest person in the room because they've got so many smart people to help them out with things.
Yep.
Who said that?
I'll tell you offline.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But that person is one of the smart people in the room. They're just
all of our people
nice and humble about things.
Yeah, but that is what's great about our folks too, is even though they are generally one of, if not the smartest person in the room, they don't act like they are, and they don't think that they are. They always know that they can learn from somebody else too.
Yep.
So
I still get blown away by the humility of people that are so on top of their game.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't need to mention me. You don't need to, no, it's fine. I don't need credit. I don't, it's like, don't look at me. Look away.
That's me.
And I want my name all over everything. It's just weird. It's like, it's just different, but
yeah. Have we gotten off topic?
I think so.
Let's get back on topic.
What was the topic again?
So how do you know?
Adding bodies, getting help.
How do you know when to ask for help? How do you
know, like, increasing the size of your team, decreasing the size of your team, just knowing, kind of having that feel. That's like one of those side effects, one of those things that is experience. It's, you're a developer. You can cut code all day long. You're awesome at it. But there's all these other things you learn along the way.
I get more anxious about decreasing the size of a team than increasing, right? I mean,
yeah,
I don't always have the best gauge for when you should do that. I mean, if you're out of stories, you're out of stories, right? If your backlog is empty, your backlog is empty, you probably don't need a full massive team. But there's an interim between that point in time and as things are starting to wrap up. And I am not great at figuring out what the sweet spot is there. So I tend to just hold on for a little longer.
It's rare to have the whole team cross the finish line at the same time, right? The whole team that's been involved, and that the other people that you've picked up along the way, you're like, hey, come with me, and then get to the finish line, all of you. It's usually like, well, okay, this one drifts away, but it's hard to let them go because you're a well-oiled machine when they've been there, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and it's like being the person that doesn't need to be there at the finish line. Well, I came in to do this part of it, and my part's done, so I can head out the door. But there's always that nagging, like, it bothers me that I wasn't there. Like, I didn't get to go to the party and hang the mission accomplished banner, and see the finished product. Like, I had to move on down the road, and that can be tough, but it's just part of the job, I think.
That's a whole other podcast right there.
That's yeah.
So Chad, and Peter, and maybe Kyle, I know it's been a while since you've been out consulting, but
I consult for SDG now.
You do, I know.
What do you mean?
But are there, I don't even know what my question is. Are there ways of doing things differently that might keep you from having to do that mad rush at the end of a project and, get the help you don't need? Not sure even the question's valid, or the right question for this conversation, but
I think, keeping that project, everyone involved in the project, up to date on where things are at certainly helps with that. I know at some of the projects that I've been on where we've had very optimistic deadlines at one point in time, and then you just communicate, and like, right. That was a very optimistic deadline that we selected. We should not go live with that date. We should go live when our MVP is actually ready.
Yeah.
Maybe it's maybe some kind of other issue is going on that's taking up the time. It's like, well, we need to deal with, maybe we need to adjust and restructure and take a step back and look at, where we're at and how things are running and make adjustments there first. Or, like right sizing in the first place. I remember, when I would build servers, it's like, okay, well, I'm like, I want to get this. Well, what are the minimum system requirements? Well, let's just do that. It's like, don't make me go with the minimum system requirements, because we're going to get an update, a patch, something's going to happen in a month. And all of a sudden we need more thunder.
That's funny, Kyle, because thinking back on all the servers that I've seen built with sort of what's the minimum we need for this? Like, and it gets spec'd out, and then very shortly after you're speccing out the upgrades or the replacement servers, because, oh yeah, that was the minimum. That was exactly the minimum that we needed. But we don't want the minimum experience. We want the maximum experience. And I think some of that goes with teams, right? Like, what's the minimum team to get a project done? Well, it's probably one developer, right? That knows everything and does all the things. But it's going to take a little time.
I think back to Claire's original question, though, it's one of the things that you try to get good at is keeping a consistent team, right? And measuring that team's velocity.
Right.
Not like I get ornery about like story points. Like, what is a story point? What is, these arbitrary units of measure, however minuscule we make, like however precise we try to make them, they're still mostly arbitrary. And whenever we put story points on a story that we're going to develop, it's always kind of a guess, right? But if you can keep a team together, and if you can keep a team happy, then eventually you're going to learn what their actual velocity is in a way that is meaningful for planning, and way more meaningful than a story point, right? Like knowing, oh, this guy kind of overestimates things and then like delivers things faster. This guy does the opposite. Keep that all track in your head. You don't get too caught up in all of the agile philosophies around like, hey, let's do a retro and let's try to fix that, right? Like, nah, just you'll eventually know. One way or the other, you'll just know. So keeping a consistent team, good or bad, you'll have high velocity fellas, some folks that are a little lower velocity, and you'll just kind of realize, okay, for the given amount of work in a healthy backlog, we've got our sprints planned out. You'll see the work go like this, hopefully, God, and you'll know kind of, you'll have a good feel. Like I have a good feel for the project I'm on now, like when we might start shedding a guy or two and where we might start shedding a guy. Okay. But I also know like if X, Y, and Z happens, then there's no way we're going to lose anybody. And then if this happens, then we're going to add folks. Right. So like there's a familiarity and a comfort level you get with your team and their work habits and their velocity and their ability to estimate work. Because on our teams, we try to estimate it together as much as possible. And it just becomes a little evident if you're paying attention that, yeah.
I always ran into, when like the perception that my guess was a promise, like this is an estimate, and then try like, how do you educate up and say, well, this is my best guess, and then for me, all you're guessing, you don't know, like how do you communicate that and say, well, our best guess right now with the information we have is we need this many people, take this long, because you never can walk in knowing for certain how things are going to go, but you might be held to it.
For me, I consistently, I hear one word and I repeat that word, but I say something else. Like I will hear, well, our timeline says this. I'm like, yes, our estimates brought us to this point, right? So that everybody understands that the timelines are built on estimates. And if one guy is consistently saying timeline without qualifying that with that it's comprised of a lot of estimates, and estimates are guesses. And I repeat that over and over and over again until I hear somebody else say it. Then I'm like, okay, now we know, okay, we're estimating a timeline and we think this might be where we're at. And we can stomp our feet and we can say, nope, this is the timeline. This is what you all agreed to, right? Like, but that's just not effective. It's, yes, we all estimated, we all got to this spot. You can say we agreed to it or not.
Right.
Whatever, right? It's semantics at that point. We estimated this, it's taking longer. Or we estimated this, and I'm actually always just as bummed, not really bummed, but I don't like things when we throw out estimates. I don't like to come in too soon either, because then that's a different set of expectations that you set yourself up for. So estimates are estimates, and I always try to, get somewhere in that middle 50%, not the bottom 25, not the top 25. Don't deliver too fast. Don't deliver too slow.
Yep.
You will find, what do the kids say today? There's going to be a vibe, right? And once you catch that vibe with the team, with everybody else, that feeling will carry through.
Once the team is vibing.
Yeah.
Vibing. There's a verb now.
It is. It absolutely is.
To build on your point, Chad, I will say that there's always sort of a 5-point story that takes forever and a 13-point story that gets done way too fast. But as long as you keep it to 1 or 2, every couple of sprints, it's not, you feel like you're doing your job well. And but there always somehow seems to be like, everybody agreed this was so easy, and it turns out it wasn't.
Yeah.
So
what are some telltale signs you need to ask for help?
Working too long every day.
Stress. Breaking out in a rash.
I am rash free, so I'm good now. Listeners, I've not a rash in my body.
Good to know. Hey, there we go.
A whole rash thing, Emily, if you want.
Those are all valid. Working too many hours. I'm very fortunate. I don't have. I enjoy working. To a big degree. I really like what I'm doing, and so when I work extra hours, as long as my client doesn't mind, I'm happy to do it. And SDG does really nice things for us when we bill a little extra. So I don't mind any of that at all, ever.
I will tell you the biggest sign is when you don't say no to anything. That's a very clear way to know that you're doing too much.
Yeah.
Because
wasn't it one of you that told me that there is no word for no in China, in the Chinese language?
Oh yeah, that was me. Yeah. I won't.
Right.
Sorry. Finish, Peter. Sorry.
But if you're not saying no, then unless you only get one unless your upstream people are doing such a great job filtering that you only get one task to work on at a time, and it takes you until you ask for the next task, you should be saying no to things. There should be things that you say no, or not now, or I can work on that, but I can't work on it right now. I can get to that, but let's put that for Q3 or something like that, because I'm full. I'm doing all that I can do.
Right.
And if your calendar is chock full of meetings every day, when are you going to do work?
Right.
I mean, that's always been
I've had the conversation that I need to offload half of this to somebody else if you want me to finish this part of it on time. Then I can't do all of this. It's like, we'll need to get somebody else to take this on. And then also working 60-hour weeks for a while. Sometimes, and that's sometimes you put yourself in those situations because you didn't say no.
Right.
I think that's kind of an experience thing of learning not to overpromise or think things through before you give an answer. When you're in the meeting, in the room, and well, when are you going to be done with this? Oh, I should have this done tomorrow. And it's, and it's someone else is shaking their head because they know there's no way that you can get it done in a day.
It does matter a lot to stay focused in your meeting. Like I find myself, if I space out a little bit and lose I'm sorry, and lose the one or two context clues that would have, hinted that, oh yeah, I'm about to agree to something that is a way bigger deal. Like, you stay focused. And that's what I get back to is like,
yeah,
if you're in a lead role, my job is to probably not be as focused, right? Take all of that other nonsense away from folks and actually focus folks. And that leads to consistency, that leads to the vibes, and that leads to a better idea of velocity and everything else. And when you can pull in more people, let people go, all of that stuff starts to kind of match reality sooner.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think there's also, for some people, a struggle about prioritizing the things you want to do over the things that you absolutely need and have to do too. That can be problematic because if you want to add those things in that you want to do that aren't necessarily as high priority as some of that other stuff, that can be difficult.
All of the books, all of the things, getting things done, they all start from the same place. What are your priorities? First, identify the things that are important to you. And
my parting thought, Chad was just saying, like, focusing your people, taking away the noise, protecting them from things they just don't need to deal with. Maybe that's how you're adding to your team. Maybe it's not adding a body. Maybe it's removing obstacles and giving them more focused time to get things done.
Mm-hmm.
Like planning how your meetings are going to happen so that they have significant chunks of time to get into the zone. And because you have to, like, when you're building something, to stop in the middle of it and then just to pick it back up is horrible.
Yeah, you should have meetings every other hour just to keep people off their game.
No.
Any other parting thoughts?
I mean, Kyle hit it on the head. Like, you can add a lot by subtracting meetings from folks' calendars, from just having somebody, the right person, around to absorb all of that nonsense. That has a ton of value, right? Like, you don't want developers, like we do our planning meetings and we make them kind of an event every other week. And that's one part of it, right? And that's you don't move those ceremonies. But adapting to your team and adapting to the environment and adapting to like not blocking people and distracting them constantly is huge for delivery, I think. I could be completely wrong. What do I know?
My parting thought is just say later instead of just say no.
That's a good one.
Multiply it by 2 and add 5.
I heard that from we had a week-long project management training at a company I worked for many, many years ago. And it's like, there's no such thing as no. There's yes with money, yes with time, yes with resources. I'm like, no, that can't be right.
Yeah, that's not good. That's not good at all.
No. Awesome. Well, I think we beat that to death.
Wow.
I'm kidding.
No, thanks for letting me hang out, guys.
Thanks for
I learned a lot, and you've definitely in this moment motivated me to at least try to get help.
Get help, Claire. Get help.
Exactly.
And with that, Let's say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
So long.
See ya.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.